Chavre, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark, und freilich, begashmus und beruches. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. Today is Erev Shabbos Kodesh, Parshas v'Eschanon, Shabbos Nachamu, and we're learning Pirkei Avos, Perek Dalet. So what is the connection between all these things, and what is the message? What is Hashem telling us today? As usual, since the war started, we start with Tzedakah. G'del Tzedakah shemakareves is Hagula. Mashiach should come now. We're going to say a blessing, a prayer. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher nosan lanu teiras emes. Hashem gave us a true Torah. V'chai elam nata b'seichenu. Baruch atah Hashem noisei na Torah. So usually it's translated v'chai elam nata b'seichenu is translated that He's given us, planted eternal life within us. But I once saw, which doesn't necessarily mean life on this planet Earth. It means He gave us the true life, spiritual life, through giving us a Torah. That means the materialism is not what's the primary focus, but spirituality, which spirituality is definitely, truly eternal. And that's what it means olam. Olam could mean eternity, forever. But I once saw a pshat, could be even in the Maimon of the Rebbe, that it also means v'chai olam, a true life on this planet Earth, not abisechenu. Through giving us a Torah, and Torah shows us how to lead an exemplary life, we have a true life. Not only because it's spiritual, because it's Parshas a better life. And this is something that everyone emphasizes all the time. The Chalal, the Rebbe's approach for this generation, wasn't only that living a life of Torah and mitzvahs is something that will give you a purpose and a meaning in life, but it means that because you have a purpose and a meaning in life, your physical life is a better life. You're truly happier. And that's the Rebbe's way about Toiv Anirv Nigla. And therefore also in this week's Parsha, like we spoke already a couple of times since we started Sefer Dvarim. Dvarim is Achsidish Vabring with Moshe Rabbeinu and all the Pesukim. And in this week's Parsha, wow, we have the Aseres HaDibros, we have Shema Yisrael, Parsha Rishonav Krishma, and we have many Pesukim, Atahorei Solodas, and we have Yadaita Yoim, and we have V'atem Adveikim, and this is the point I want to bring out now, V'atem Adveikim B'Hashem Elokeichem Chaim Kulcham Hayom. If you want to have Pasha a good life, and a good life on every single level, physical, simple, Pasha, meaning of the word life, so V'atem Adveikim B'Hashem Elokeichem. Choose Hashem, choose a life of Torah and mitzvahs, and you'll have a better physical life. So that's also the meaning of the bracha and the prayer and the thanks and gratitude that we give Hashem. Asher nosan l'teres emes v'chai elam nata b'seichenu, a good life on this planet Earth with Torah and mitzvahs. So in that vein, we have a fascinating halacha that we learn out from this week's parsha. One of the things that it speaks about is Ori Miklot. And the Pasuk says over there, V'nosal achas min ha'orim ha'el, that the unintentional murderer, the one who killed someone, Meshegeg, runs to one of these cities of refuge, V'choy, so that he should live. And the Gemara learns out from this, Omer Reb Yitzchak, my krov v'nosal achas min ha'orim we have to do something for him. They should have a real life, conducive to living. And from this we learn out that Maglin Rabbi Imoy Shenemar V'choy, that if you have a student, the teacher of the student also has to go into exile with the student, so that the student should have a life. And this also brought down a Rambam in Hilchos Shetzech Reish Perek Zayin. The Rambam brings it down the halacha that if a student goes into exile, the teacher has to go with him. The Rambam says, Bali Chochma V'Aksheh, those that are knowledgeable people and seeking wisdom. And he has to have his teacher to teach him Torah, because below Talmud Torah kamisa chshuvin. Because without Talmud Torah, it's considered like they're not alive. What I'm going to say today is just one part of a Sikha of the Rebbe in Chelik Chof Tes. Over there, the Rebbe goes much more barichas at length. One of the things the Rebbe talks about, which I'm not getting into, which is a beautiful point, about the idea that it has to be Bali Chachma Mvaksher. We're talking about a person who seeks wisdom, who's seeking spirituality. And for such a person who's a seeker and thirsty and hungry and wants, without spirituality, without a teacher, it's like he's not alive. See there. I'm going to speak one point of that sikha, but before we get to that, I want to connect it with a general subject about teachers, influencers. How today, we've forgotten the whole real, true method based on a relationship. It's so interesting that today, everyone who's a personality on internet is called influencer. The word in Hebrew for the influencer is mashpia. I'm a so-called mashpia in the yeshiva. But the word mashpia, and I heard this from the Rebbe himself, comes from the word shefa. And shefa, in Chassidus, there's a discussion about the difference between shefa and oir. Oir is light, which is an emanation, a ray, which comes out of a source. The sun emits light. But shefa there's a mashpia teacher, and he gives shefa, he gives something to the student. One of the major discussions between the difference between the oir and moir and the shefa and the mashpia, the Rebbe said a word, if I remember correctly, as shefa muss kosten the mashpia gesund. It goes from the mashpia to the makabel. It leaves the mashpia. He gives of himself to the student. And therefore makes a huge difference how he's involved in the hashpah. Oir and moir, we say the oir, the light, doesn't make a shini by the moir, by the luminary, by the sun. Makes no difference whether the sun is emitting light. There's no before, there's no after. The sun is always giving out this ray. And it doesn't affect the sun. You have the sun, it's illuminating an apartment building. In one apartment, someone's taking a suntan. In another apartment, someone's using the magnifying glass to start a fire. And an apartment, there's a cat that's getting warmed up by the rays of the sun in the morning. It makes no difference to the sun what's happening where? Through the rays of the sun. But the mashpia, shefa, Chassidus explains that before the class, the teacher prepares. During the class, he's completely phenomen. He's occupied, zugetragen, with his full attention to the student. And afterwards, he gets enjoyment that the student understands. It's very frustrating the student didn't get it. So it makes a huge difference because he's much more involved. The pneumius in the hashpah that he gives. But wait a second, I really jumped ahead. So now, this word that we're talking about, the teacher-student, that the teacher has to go into exile with the student, just shows to what degree the teacher-student relationship is. And the contrast, if we talk about an influencer, you make a shir, you give a talk, and that's it, and you're influencing people, and you're called an influencer. That's a real influencer. A real influencer means you're totally involved in that person's life, the one who you're trying to influence, and you will influence. To what degree? That if he goes into exile, you have to go into exile with him. That's how much the circumstances and the situation of your student affect you. Total contrast. Different world than the language that we use today when we use the word influence. What it really means, according to Torah, what it means to be a teacher. So, that's one pasuk in this week's parsha, that we learn out from that pasuk, that v'choy, what does it mean that he really is able to live in that city? that we send this teacher with him, which as a side point, we can get into the whole discussion. Here we see a clear ayah from the Torah that what is the definition of life? As we spoke about in the beginning of today's shir, Chai Elam, life in the physical world, means that if this person goes to a city of refuge, you have to send him as teacher of spirituality. That's the meaning of his physical life. Not the life of a peasant, not the life of every single Tom, Dick, and Harry, but the life of a Jew. Means just like you give him water. You have to make sure he has water and electricity, and he has the bare necessities. In the same way, you have to send with him a teacher to teach him Torah. And if he doesn't have that, he doesn't have a life. But now, I want to connect it with another pasuk in this week's parsha, which in a way, that pasuk says it all. What does Rashi say in the pasuk? V'shinantam levanecha, v'shinantam levanecha ela talmidim. We find all over that students are called children. We once spoke about this Rashi, a different sikha of the Rebbe. But this time we'll stress some different points. So first of all, over here you see straight away, he says all over students are called children. So right away that's another foundation. It's another yesod on the whole concept that we're talking about influencer, a teacher. By Yiddishkeit, being a teacher means like these are your children. And because of that, everything is different. It starts out of the love. And because of the love, there's going to come the care, the trust, and the respect. It's a whole different thing. Starting, see the Alter Rebbe in Iggeres HaKodesh Tes Vav, where he talks about teaching and a teacher, and he gives an example of a teacher, a father teaching a son. And he says, he talks about a real idea of a teacher, and he connects it to the attribute of Yesod, connecting. You're bonding with your child. The ultimate example is the father teaching with his son. So when he's learning with him, because he loves his son, he wants his son really to understand. And he says over here, you're not learning with him because it's a job. You're not learning with him because you have to. You enjoy it. This is your pleasure. This is your desire and delight. And in other words, according to the measure of your enjoyment and the relationship, and today you'd call it attachment, so the teaching will be more intense, more greater, more beautiful, and the student will take more. And what better expression, manifestation of this concept than in the same parsha, this law that when the student has to go into exile, you have to go into exile with him. Parents have the children's back. Where you go, I go. So of course the teacher is going with his son. He wants to make sure he still loves his son. He wants to make sure his son is going to survive. Not only survive, thrive in the Ir Miklat. How amazing is that? So it goes together. Where do we see an expression of this idea, Vishinantam Levanecha? Ela Talmidim. No better example in the idea that Talmud, which went into exile, so the rabbi also has to go into exile because he's like your child. Now, interestingly, there is also the pasuk later on in Parshas, the second Parsha of Shema, which I think is in Parshas Eikev. There's a whole discussion of the difference between Parsha Yeshayim, Shema, and Parsha Shnia. It's interesting that in this week's Parsha, the word is Vishinantam Levanecha, and in Parsha Yeshayim Krishma, but in Parsha Shnia it says Lamadatem as Benechem. So there's Limud and there's Vishinantam. So, whatever, I'm sure there's a major discussions about this. Where do we learn the mitzvah of Talmud Torah? The Rambam, I think, it's Sefer HaMitzvah brings from Vishinantam. And that itself is pretty interesting, because that means the mitzvah itself of learning Torah, we learn out from a pasuk which says, Vishinantam levanecha. What about a mitzvah of learning Torah for yourself? Not only Vishinantam levanecha. And maybe you could say, B'derech drush. B'derech drush, you could say that this is a commandment. Everybody has to make himself a teacher. It's not only that you should learn Torah for yourself. You should learn Torah in such a way that you could teach Torah. That's a real sign that you're learning properly, when your learning is done in such a way that you can give it over to somebody else. And that's how you're meant to learn Torah. Now, I saw a vort. I just opened up the Kahas Chumash, and they bring down a vort from the Frierdiker Rebbe, side point, which has nothing to do primarily with what we're talking about, but it's still so unbelievable that I'm going to mention it. This is from Sefer HaSichos, Tafshin Gimel, Amud 46. And I'm going to read to you what the Frierdiker Rebbe says inside. Es steht Vishinantam levanecha, und nachdem steht Ulmadatem v'goymer. He says, first we have Parshas V'eschanan, where the pasuk says Vishinantam. Later on, in the next Parsha, we see Ulmadatem. The movement is not understood. Shinon meant Ibechazaren. The word Shinon is like Mishnah Torah. It means to repeat, to go it over. And with the Malata meant Lenin. And the word Malata means to learn. First it should have said Malata, learn. And then it said Vishinantam, review it. Now Vishinantam meant einchazen in dem Teike for Amunah. Dem Shema. Rosh Tevesu Morim Einechem. Or Umi Bara Eile. It means to become inculcated, engrave the power of faith and the Shema, because first it says Shema Yisrael. Take the Shema, which the Shin Mem Ayin stands for Sumar Menechem. Pick up your eyes, look heavenward, look towards Hashem, and see who created this world. Ein Chazrin, drill into yourself. Amadav machen brachas, that we have to make brachas, say blessings. Ein Chazrin the brachas. Make it that you know the brachas by heart. And I'm bringing them Shema Yisrael and them Torah Tziva. Bring the faith of Hashem into the Torah that you're learning. Wow. I'm taking pshat over here. The Vishinantam levanecha means al derech the word gedele shimusha yesim limuda. If we look at the lifestyle of a child, first starts training, similar to what the Alter Rebbe says, the word Amunah and Miloshen Imun Yad also. How does the child really get, how do we influence the child? How do we really teach this child? By him seeing a lifestyle, a technical lifestyle of Judaism. Judaism is not a subject. Learning could be a subject. Judaism is not only a subject, but it's a way of life. And that's what it means, Vishinantam levanecha. What he has to see, what the child has to see, and what your students have to see, is how you're a role model, and how things of Torah and mitzvahs and Yiddishkeit, that's your very life. He sees you make a bracha. He sees you answer Amen, Amen Yeshmei Rabbah. He sees how you live your life. Your Judaism is a life that reflects all the values and virtues that Yiddishkeit talks about, and that it's your life. And that's how it becomes ingrained. Training by your children, by your students. So first it's Vishinantam, Ein Chazrin. And then they'll learn the reasons behind it, or to understand the intricacies of law. When does this apply? When does that apply? But the first thing is Vishinantam. That's a word from the Frierdiker Rebbe. Now, it's another very, very important point. That was a side point. Now I want to say the word that the Rebbe says in the Sikha of Chelik of Tes. What does it mean that the teacher goes into exile? It means Maglin Rabbi Imai, not Mevian Rabbi Imai. in order for the teacher to really have an impact on the student, they have to have the shared experience. The teacher has to show that he identifies with the student. If not, imagine if the teacher went into exile with the student, but he's living in a mansion, and the student is living in a shack. The whole circumstance would be completely different. Then the teacher wouldn't be able to be mashpia on the student. As the Rebbe says, there's a division between them. The Talmud is in Golus, the Talmud is in exile, and the Rav in Cherus, and the teacher is living a different sort of life, even if he was sent to the same city. So then the Rav would not be able to totally involve himself in the student's situation to be able to impact him in the right way. But it has to be that they have to find themselves in the selben Golus, wie the Talmud gefindt sich. The teacher has to find himself in the same Golus. So again, getting back to the idea of respect and trust and identifying, the teacher has to lower himself to the realm of the student in order that they should be able to relate beprimius. There's an English saying, which I've said many, many times, which I think is unbelievable, which applies, I don't want to elaborate on it now because we mentioned this many times, seek first to understand, then to be understood. This applies to the teacher and the student, but now we're talking on the part of the teacher. Seek first to understand. You have to understand who you're dealing with. And that's what it means over here, that the teacher is sent into Golus also. If he's not in Golus, if he doesn't have that sort of called empathy, then he won't be able to relate to the student properly. The only way you'll be able to connect with the student, and those are the greatest teachers, the ones who really communicate. But why do they communicate? Because they connect. How are you able to connect? Because you put yourself into his mindset. That's what it's all about. When you're sharing similar experiences, then you can relate, then you can teach, then you connect, and then you're able to help him. Otherwise, you won't be able to help him. And the Sikh over there in Chilik of Teres, that Rebbe's whole word is that the same thing is like Abba the Eibishter, Magid Varov the Yaakov Chokov Mishpatov. We're in Golus. Hashem is with us. Mamish with us. Shchinta begalusa. Just like the teacher is with the student, Hashem is with us, experiencing the Golus. B'chol tzarosam lo yitzar. He feels the pain, and therefore he will even bring Mashiach to redeem himself. Kaviyachol. See there. So the Rebbe in the Sikh over there finishes off with the idea of Golus. We're in Golus. We have to realize that we're empowered being in Golus by knowing that Hashem is with us. And that's the most important message. I want to connect it to Pirkei Avos this week, which is a very phenomenal Mishnah. Let the honor of your student be as dear to you as your own. The honor of your colleague as the reverence for your teacher. And the reverence for your teacher as the fear of heaven. You know, I wish one day we'll give a share and just talk the argument for humility. In general. I wish someone could talk about the subject Al Pitera and be so convincing, such a good influencer, that one share on this subject would influence everybody to be more humble. What kind of beautiful world that would be. And the truth is, that's the Alter Rebbe in chapter 30 of Tanya, which is unbelievable. He speaks on the Mishnah of Aveshalruch Nikolodam. In this week's Perek, previously it said, Ma'oid Ma'oid Aveshalruch. So, what do we see from this Mishnah at least? Talking about the subject of humility, is that there's three levels here. There's an inferior, there's an equal, and a superior. Your student, l'chayr, is your inferior. And we say, take him up a notch. Treat the one who's inferior to you as an equal. The one who's your equal, your colleague, treat him as somebody who's superior. The one who's superior, which is your teacher, you lift him up. Make him like the Eibishter. So in every situation, the point is, look at the other person, lift up the other person, make him feel more valuable. And that's all coming, truthfully, once you have a good teacher who understands how he's going to be more effective. In order to be more effective, obviously, like we said before, it starts from the love. When you look at your students as your children, and therefore, like we said before, you'll respect them because you love them, and you'll see their virtues, and therefore it'll create trust, and therefore the whole teaching will be different, etc., etc., etc. Now the Meforshim over here bring out an important point that Rabbi Elazar ben Shemu was one of the 5 Talmidim that survived the plague of Talmid Rebbe Kiva. And what does it say about why there was a plague of the 24,000 students of Rebbe Kiva? Because they didn't have respect one for the other. So therefore Rabbi Elazar ben Shemu in this Mishnah is talking about the importance of respect. Very interesting. Now I want to connect it to Shabbos Parshas Nachamu Nachamu. The message of Parshas Nachamu is students, is children, is grandchildren. Nachamu means the future. Tisha B'Av was last week. We're moving on. We're going to see how Tisha B'Av itself was something which was good and part of redemption, etc., etc. But the main question is in every situation, instead of us, like the story of the Friedrich Rebbe and the Rebbe Rashab, and the answer was, so the same thing is right now. It comes after Tisha B'Av, and Baruch Hashem now we have the Shiva de Nechemte. So we're going forward, and we have to realize, and I think this is something that has to be stressed again and again, for those that don't get it, everything is chinuch, chinuch, chinuch. I mentioned this already before. I remember seeing a letter once from the Rebbe, where the Rebbe writes, the Nekudim Shutefes, the common denominator of all the Rabbeim of Chabad, was chinuch, education. Because chinuch is the emphasis on the future. Our most important asset is our children and our students. We have to invest more in that than anything else. Because that's Nachamu, Nachamu. And maybe you could say, but the Lashon Drush, Nachamu, Nachamu, double Nachama means, because they're not going to only be as good as us, they're going to be better. Yofa koyach haben. And that's why it's Nachamu, Nachamu. We have to look at the future and not say, I've seen the future and I'm not excited about it. We have to say, Punkt Farke, the opposite way around. I've seen the future. And it's Zeh Nachmenu, it's beautiful. And there's a story I said already before, and now I just want to say it for 2 seconds. I'm not going to say it at length. One time the Alter Rebbe was in a situation and he spoke out loud and he turned to the Baal Shem Tov. He said, Zeide, Rebbe, Zayt Meire Rachem Rabem, Ba'adi uvad kol my Talmidechem, uvad ha-mekusharim aleichem, uvad teraschem. The Alter Rebbe turned to the Baal Shem Tov and he gave a cry out, Oy, Gewalt, Gewalt. Ovinu shebeshamayim chutz v'rachem aleinu. Und is umgefallen and hat tieferes Alphas. The Alter Rebbe spoke like that and then he fainted. This is in Sefer HaSichos Tovshin, Amud 65. Anyways, he fainted. It made a big tumult. Everybody came running, including the Tzemach Tzedek. They brought Rabbi the doctor, and the Tzemach Tzedek was 2 years and 9 months old. That's the Alter Rebbe's grandson. Was 2 years and 9 months old. Der Zendik, as ein Zede, the Alter Rebbe liegt auf dem Brick. He saw his grandfather lying on the floor. Hat sich a Warf getan auf dem Rebbe. He jumped on the Rebbe, on the Alter Rebbe's grandfather. He jumped on the grandfather and he cried out, Zede, Zede! Hat the Rebbe geöffnet eine Kotsche. The Alter Rebbe opened his eyes and he saw the way the kid, the child, streckt ihm aus seine kleine Händelech, schreiende Zede, halt sich an meine Hand und stellt sich. He opened his eyes and he saw his grandson. His 2-year-old grandchild said, Zede, Stretch out your hand, hold on to my hand, and stand. Hat der Rebbe ungenommen dem Kind's Handlach. The Alter Rebbe grabbed his grandchild's hands. Zong dik dabei, Havli Yodcha, he told him, give me your hand. And so sich aufgestellt, he stood up. The 2.5-year-old told him, stand up. And the Alter Rebbe stood up, Zong dik dabei, and he said, Zeh Yinachmenu. He shall console me. He shall console us. He will bring us comfort. So we're looking for the ultimate Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, Yemar, Eloi Kechem. We're looking for the ultimate Shabbos Nachamu, Begula, Mitzvah, Shlema, take me ad Mamish. But we also have to know, Bisma kommt an Kretschma. Every single day, every single minute, we have to focus and understand that our primary energies and resources have to be focused on the youth, our children, our grandchildren, our students, because this is the future. It's going to be the kin, the lach. They're going to bring Mashiach. Take it from me, ad mamish, the meiri v'yameinu, amen. Posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, your man in Melbourne.